Hi everyone, my name is Jenny and I'm back today to do another video. Today I'm going to be doing a book haul of sorts. Before I kind of get into the book haul, I do want to also point out, and you are already aware of this because you, unlike myself, know the final length of this video. So if you've already clicked on this video, you know how long it's going to be. But I have a feeling this is going to be kind of a long video because this video is really going to be more of me discussing and talking through and kind of creating a video to keep myself accountable, in all honesty, of my kind of book buying strategy moving forward for the next couple of months, as well as potentially moving forward into the future, masquerading as a book haul. So I'm going to be chatting quite a lot about my book buying ideas and behaviors that I want to not do as much of in the future, or behaviors that I want to do more, all of which will kind of be encompassed in some capacity by a book in this book haul. I just did want to point that out before we get into the books, that I will be kind of talking through the kind of ways in which I've bought books in this book haul and like the ways that I potentially may not want to buy books that way in the future. So without further ado, let's kind of get into this book haul slash book buying discussion video. So as you may have seen in my TBR reduction plan slash 5-star prediction video that I put up back in June, I have a plan to reduce my physical TBR by about 50 to 60 books by the end of this kind of school year, beginning of next summer. Hopefully get to this kind of TBR goal, as I am in all likelihood moving next summer, although with COVID-19 who knows what will be happening next summer, or if we will even still have a plan. Honestly, it's totally unclear to me. But if we do somehow return to some type of normal, there's a vaccine or anything, I will likely be moving next summer because I will be going to grad school in the fall. So I do not want to bring a bunch of books that I haven't read with me if I do move, because I will inevitably be moving to a smaller place. So I kind of have this plan of reducing my TBR. But during that video, I did not really account for the fact that I also love buying books. Like, it brings me great joy. And so I did not really make a plan of like how I'm going to reduce and change my book buying strategy and habits, which means that I've reduced my physical TBR from that video to now by like maybe 2 or 3 books over the course of these 3 months. So that's not great. So I had to kind of reflect back on like what book buying strategies that I'm currently using do I want to try to stop using, and which ones do I want to promote in my life to allow myself the ability to buy books, as buying books is something that I do really enjoy, and I love supporting indie bookstores. I always have. Indie bookstores are definitely a place in my life where I've gone pre-pandemic, obviously, to kind of, in times of stress or sadness, just like go and like browse the bookshelves is always been something that's like really comforting for me. So even like before, when I was a kid, Barnes & Noble also brought that like joy to my life of just like being in Barnes & Noble surrounded by a bunch of books that I could potentially have, was one of my favorite activities as a child. So that has always been something that I love, and I definitely don't want to stop buying books completely, nor do I think I could do that, but I do want to kind of re-evaluate how I'm buying books and where I'm spending my like book budget. So that's kind of the big overarching theme of this video, is just kind of talking through what ways I've been buying books that maybe I don't want to buy anymore. So now let's just get into where the books that I'm about to talk about have come from, and whether or not I want to kind of continue using those strategies. And also, I just wanted to point out, because I didn't think about this, I have not shopped from Amazon for buying books for several years, but kind of in general for the past like year and a half or so. So none of these books are from Amazon. Amazon is already something that I've like cut out of my life, but other retailers, I do want to kind of monitor my book buying from them, even if they are an ethical retailer and a retailer that I do want to support. So I just wanted to also point that out. So first, beginning with a online retailer that I do really appreciate their mission. They have a very socially forward mission. However, just with online retailers in general, I do think there's kind of a tendency towards being forced into, or feeling like you have to buy a bunch of books at once, which is just not conducive to reducing your TBR, because you can really only read so many books in a single month or at a single time. So buying a bunch of books really just only adds to your TBR and does not help you reduce it really in any way. So while I do appreciate online retailers for what they do, I don't really want to support online book retailers anymore. But the one that I've specifically most recently bought books from was Better World Books, which does have a, like, as I said, socially forward mission of donating books and increasing literacy programs in the United States, and I believe elsewhere in the world. So this is a company that has kind of a good mission, and I would definitely recommend them if you are looking for a used book retailer. Just FYI, the vast majority of their stock is used library books, so you do kind of have to do a little bit of library surgery on them to like get the stickers off and stuff, but I don't mind that, and if you don't mind that, I would recommend them as a retailer. But the couple of books that I bought during the middle of August, I think, and even then I was like, oh, I really shouldn't do this, but I found this first book and then obviously felt compelled to like buy a few other books. So this first one is Makers and Takers: The Rise of Finance and the Fall of American Business by Rana Foroohar, who is an economic analyst who currently works for, I don't think she works for Time Magazine anymore because this is a couple years old, but she's worked for a bunch of major news outlets here in the US as an economic analyst. And this book I actually found on the library website, which I'll put a link to down in the description box below, for the New Consensus, which is a think tank that actually was the masterminds behind the Green New Deal. And so I don't remember even how I found out about this think tank, but they have this library of books about economics and kind of creating and reevaluating America's economy and kind of the ways in which that we understand economy and its relationship to government and how we can kind of potentially make that more sustainable. So they had a bunch of books of kind of like, here's a refresher or here's a little syllabus of books about economics, and this was one that really caught my attention, particularly because on the website it has its reprinted subtitle, which is How Wall Street Destroyed Main Street. I'll put a picture of its like reprinted edition here. They're the same book, it got a total like refurb during its paperback printing, but this one, as it says in the subtitle, is basically about how kind of neoliberal economic thought really gave rise to Wall Street and the kind of major national, multinational corporation of business, which I talked a lot about when I read Barrel Aged Stout and Selling Out, which I can't remember which reading vlog it was, sometime during the month of August that I read and reviewed this, but I will put a link to it up in the cards above. But this one is about a multinational business, Anheuser-Busch, which is now part of InBev, which is a multinational corporation. And a lot of this book is discussing the kind of antagonistic relationship between small local businesses and large multinational companies. So I was really excited to see this book that's kind of talking about that idea in a more large scale sense, and so I'm really excited to read this one. And actually my dad in his retirement is working on this kind of finance project as a little retirement hobby slash, you know, fun gig. And so I was telling him about this think tank and their library and kind of asking him if he had read any of the books on the library. He said he hadn't, but he is where I've gotten my love and obsession of buying books from. And so he actually bought several of the other books on this list that I may read from him at some point. But he also started reading this one and he's in the middle of it right at this moment, actually. So we will probably kind of talk about these two books together and maybe some of the other economic books, because it is something that we are both interested in. So here's this first one. But then, as I said, I'm pretty sure they had a coupon of like buy 4 books and get 25% off, which obviously, like, if you have a coupon, your little mind can't handle coupons and they just have to buy everything. So I did end up getting several other books. Many other of the books are nonfiction, which I'm hoping to get to during Nonfiction November. The first of which is Bleaker House by Nell Stevens, chasing my novel to the end of the world. Now, I just talked about in my Labor Day vlog that I don't like memoirs, and I'm not sure what appeals to me about this book, especially because it's not rated very high on Goodreads, but I've wanted to read this book for several years, and it is the memoir of Nell Stevens, who I believe went to the Iowa Writers Workshop or some other very prestigious writers workshop. Just kidding, she's an MFA in fiction from Boston University. But she received this fellowship to go anywhere in the world, all expenses paid, and kind of work on her novel and research her novel. And she ends up going to the Falkland Islands, which I've also considered, you know, leaving it all behind and just going to a remote island where only penguins live. And I think she kind of realizes a lot of what she's left behind and kind of how toxic it was, and also how challenging it is to write a novel when you have writer's block. So I don't know, I'm really excited about this one. Maybe I heard someone like several years ago, probably back like 2015, 2016, talk about this on BookTube and really enjoy it. It might have been Mercedes from Mercy's Bookish Musings, now that I think about it, because this seems like a book she would like, but maybe she also hated it. I don't know. But I picked this one up because it was literally like $2, and I also love the penguin on the cover. So also hoping to get to this one during Nonfiction November. Hopefully you will sense a theme. about nonfiction November in the rest of this book haul. But then I also got Walkable City, How Downtown Can Save America One Step at a Time by Jeff Speck. I don't remember if I've talked about this on my channel. I think I have, but I'm currently in the middle of applying to grad programs for urban planning to start next fall. So urban planning is obviously something I'm very interested in, and this book is definitely just an urban planning book that I've kind of had on my radar for a while and was available at Better World Books. So I ended up getting it, and it is just kind of about walkability and the importance of walkability in urban design. So excited about that one. And then we also have a book that I think I heard Rincey from Rincey Reads talk about a couple months back. Honestly, what is time anymore? But this is Amity and Prosperity, One Family and the Fracturing of America by Eliza Griswold. I'm 95% sure this won the Pulitzer Prize, although this edition doesn't say it because, as I said, Better World Books has library books, and this was obviously bought by the library before it won the Pulitzer Prize. So I believe this is talking about a family in rural Pennsylvania at the edge of Appalachia is what it says. Yeah, Amity, Pennsylvania, as a fracking company comes to their town and begins working, you know, doing fracking. I don't know what the verb to go along with fracking is. And basically one woman's kind of struggles and kind of journey into activism to get the company to leave their town, because obviously fracking has huge negative environmental impacts on the town and the community that it enters into. So I'm super intrigued about this one, this fracking and Appalachia and the kind of complicated history of energy and working class people in Appalachia and the kind of lack of voice that is often present within working class communities when it comes to kind of the discussion surrounding energy in the Appalachian region is something that is super fascinating to me, and I've heard really good things about this one, so excited about that. And then the last book that I got from Better World Books was My Education by Susan Choi. I've not read Susan Choi before, although I know she has written Trust Exercise, which is her most recent book. This was, I believe, the book before that. It came out in like 2013. And this one is actually going to be a book that I'm going to be reading for a video idea that I have. And this is a novel that follows a graduate student who gets involved with her professor. And I believe their relationship extends for several years, potentially decades, and it is bad news all the time. So very intrigued about that one. We'll be talking about this one hopefully in a video before the end of the year, but I'm not going to make any promises on that. So those are all the Better World books. As I said, I do appreciate Better World Books for the kind of work it's doing, especially as a potential alternative to some of the other online book retailers that are potentially less ethical and less socially minded. But I personally am going to try to stop my Better World Books love and avoid shopping with them until I can kind of get my TBR down, and then potentially in the future also still avoid shopping with them. So now moving into kind of another area of book buying that has been something that I've done for several years now, but I do kind of want to peel back on, which is visiting my local used and new bookstore, which is called Eagle Eye Books. I will put a link to all of the kind of book retailers that I talk about down in the description box below. Pretty much all of them are local to Atlanta, but they ship nationally, so I would recommend checking them out if you're looking for some indies to support. All of these are ones that are very close to my heart and ones that I support pretty frequently. So I do love Eagle Eye. I give my books there. It's where I kind of sell my books for credit, and so that is another aspect of kind of my book buying, is that if I do have books for credit, I will sell them for credit and potentially get books from them. As I said, they do have new books, so I might prioritize getting fewer new books as opposed to a lot of used books from them. I haven't really decided because I don't have any credit at this moment, but I do want to kind of minimize going to their bookstore because I do often find myself finding a book that I've like heard about, it's on my radar, maybe I'll get to it someday, finding it for a good price, as you'll see in just a minute, and then just kind of picking it up on a whim without actually making a plan to read it, which I think then causes the book to sit on my shelf for several years, even though I continue to be interested in reading it. It's just other books get my attention, or other books have priority for various different reasons. However, my mom and I actually went this past weekend over Labor Day because her book club's book for the month, they had as a used copy, and it was a book that came out earlier this year that was going to be like $30, and it was instead like $15-16, which was The Night Watchman by Louise Erdrich. One I've heard a little bit of mixed reviews on. My mom is not enjoying it, but she also doesn't super love books that are really depressing. So I don't think she's having a fun time, but I am very intrigued by Louise Erdrich. I actually already have, probably from Eagle Eye as well, The Roundhouse by Louise Erdrich, which is where I was planning on starting. And in general, I've tried to avoid having multiple books by the same author on my TBR shelf. That's been a rule that I've had in place for several years, just because I think it does help you manage kind of the number of unread or unnecessary books to have on your shelves. So I will hopefully read The Roundhouse very soon, since I now have The Night Watchman on my shelves. But also, given that this is my mom's book club, this is technically her book, so it's also not one that is necessarily getting counted in this like 25-30 number, which I kind of explained in that TBR reduction video. But I do have this one. I believe it's a historical fiction novel, yes, set in the 1950s, and I believe it's inspired by Erdrich's grandfather, who was involved potentially in the American Indian movement. Yeah, it kind of sounds like he gets involved in some like activism surrounding the kind of rights of Native American people in the 1950s and 60s. So I'm intrigued about that one, but I have heard some mixed things about it. But then I also, since I was there, did find a book for $8.99 that was a brand new hardcover copy of Sing Unburied Sing by Jesmyn Ward. Ward is an author that I have been interested in trying for several years now. As you may know, I have a love of Southern literature and like to read from the South kind of as frequently as possible. And Jesmyn Ward is from Mississippi, and she lives there now, I'm almost positive. She's currently an associate professor of creative writing at Tulane University. So just kidding, she lives next door in, no, but she lives in Mississippi. Well, New Orleans is not far from Mississippi. But anyway, so she is an author that I've been meaning to try, and this was the one that they had a used copy of. I think I was potentially interested in starting with Salvage the Bones, but I guess I will now start with Sing Unburied Sing. And this one I don't know a ton about. I just know that Efron really loved it. It's about a family, and I believe they're going to visit the father who's in prison. I really don't know that much about this book, but I was intrigued to read it either way. So those are the two kind of main areas of book buying that I've utilized in the past that I don't particularly want to utilize as much moving forward, but I am still excited about all of those books and will hopefully be reading them soon. Now moving into a couple of books that I feel kind of ambivalent about. They're like book buying. They're not necessarily part of my official plan, but they are also not things that I necessarily see as bad habits that I want to break because they're relatively rare. So the first of which was a book that I just ended up getting from my local indie bookstore because, again, I was talking to my dad and he asked me if I had this book. I said I didn't, but I was interested in it. He wanted to buy it on Amazon for like $12 and I was like, no, I will pay the extra $4. Well, I ended up paying the whole thing because I bought it, but I will pay the extra $4 to get it from our local indie bookstore. That's the bookstore that I would most recommend if travel ever becomes a real thing again and you're ever in Atlanta, which is Acapella Books. They're located in my neighborhood, or kind of the neighborhood adjacent to mine, and are kind of an Atlanta institution. Definitely the kind of most well-known bookstore here. I love them. I've loved shopping there. I love the owner. I don't know him very well, but he seems like a great guy. And so they have been doing this kind of in-town delivery where they'll bring your book in a cute little brown paper bag and like put it by your door. So we did that for this book, which is Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America by Ibram X. Kendi. I read Kendi's memoir, How to Be an Anti-Racist, back in July and have wanted to read this one for several years. I heard about it when I was in school, probably around the time it came out. I think it came out in 2016. Yeah, it came out in 2016 and I probably heard about it in 2016, 2017. Was intrigued about it then, but since I was in school and I was also taking a lot of history classes when I was doing my undergrad, I didn't want to take on this 500-page hefty nonfiction book during that time. And then just in the past year, never got around to buying a copy, but my dad wanted to read it and he actually has read it, would highly recommend it. And so we figured that we would just pick up a copy that anyone in my family could read, although it is technically mine. But this one, as it says on the subtitle, is a history of racist ideas. So Kendi is following 5 major figures within American history that Kendi argues, I believe, were major figures within the discussion of like racism and anti-racism in the United States for their time, and were kind of major players within that discussion. So the first of which is Cotton Mather, then he follows Thomas Jefferson, William Lloyd Garrison, W.E.B. Du Bois, and then Angela Davis as kind of a present day person. So I'm super excited about this one and to kind of learn more about these 5 historical figures. Obviously, I know some of each of their histories, but definitely not as much, I'm sure, as I will learn in this book. So another one that I'm hoping to get to Nonfiction November. I think this is gonna be my priority for Nonfiction November and be like the book that I'll be reading all month. But I also have another book that I'm reading for the Reading Women Challenge for Nonfiction November, which my Nonfiction November TBR is gonna be a lot. As I said, you'll see a pattern with Nonfiction November. So this one is one that I'm super excited about, but just kind of bought on a whim for my indie bookstore, which is fine. You know, I like supporting indie bookstores, but I do kind of want my book buying to be a little more planned, as I'll get into in just a minute. Then I also had 2 pre-orders, one of which hasn't actually come out yet. It's coming out on the 22nd, so I'll talk about that one second. But the first of which was Transcendent Kingdom by Gyasi. This one I pre-ordered as a signed first edition, so I'll show you her signature. I'm so excited. From Lemuria Books, which is in Jackson, Mississippi. I honestly don't know how I heard of this bookstore because I've never been to Jackson, Mississippi. As I said, I do like reading Southern literature and supporting businesses in the South. Particularly, I'd love to visit Jackson, Mississippi, as I think it is a very fascinating place with a very interesting history that I believe is a lot more of a place of activism and progressivism than is potentially known on like the national news scale, as I definitely know that they have a very progressive mayor right now whose name is escaping me. I'll put it right here, that you should definitely look up because he's definitely, I think, gonna be a big person in politics moving forward. But anyway, back to this book. So obviously I and everyone else loved Homegoing and was so excited to hear about this book. So I pre-ordered this signed first edition that, as you can see, has this like library binding on it. You can take off the desk jacket, but for some reason, and I think this is because their signed first editions are catered towards collectors or people that will later sell the first editions for a lot of money on eBay or whatever, given in like 10-15 years, which I'm not planning on doing with this book. So I might actually take off this library like cover thing because I don't like it very much. But I am excited because it doesn't have the god awful like Read with Jenna sticker that I think the second printing must have had, because every other person on BookTube that I've seen talk about this book or like show it in book haul or even in a review has the little like emblem on it, so it must have been the second printing. But this one, luckily, as a first edition, does not, so I'm super excited about that. I've talked about it a couple times on my channel, but it is a literary fiction novel following Gifty, who is a neuroscience PhD at Stanford, and basically dealing with kind of everything that's happening in her life. I think I've heard that it's a discussion on the intersections of like faith and science, which is something that is super intriguing to me, as well as a discussion of depression and drug addiction, as her brother was lost to a heroin overdose after a football injury, I believe, that led him into opioid and then heroin. Super excited about this one. I believe I'll be reading this one with Lindsay as a buddy read in the next couple months, so excited about that one. But I don't usually pre-order books. Have always wanted to do it and I never really do, but so I might start doing it more regularly. But this was one, especially since it was going to be a signed first edition, that I was really excited about. And then the other one is one that I actually got an early copy of from NetGalley, which was Sustainable Kitchen, which is a cookbook that comes out on September 22nd. And as I said, I read this one as an early copy from NetGalley and I really enjoyed it. The recipes look really good. They're all vegetarian recipes. They're not vegan. Most of them include milk and cheese in some way. But I am very into kind of increasing your sustainability and your consumption of local in-season produce and implementing that into your diet as much as possible is something that I like to do in my own life. These were all recipes that seemed kind of up my alley and ones that I would use regularly. I will say, just as an FYI, this book has a fair amount of like religious undertones to it, Christian religious undertones to be specific, in terms of like a few quotes from the Bible and like talking about how kind of living off the land is part of like God's plan for us. So if Christianity is something that's like really not for you, it's not something that bothers me whatsoever. In fact, I would almost call myself like Christian adjacent, so it was not a positive or negative of this book for me personally, but just as an FYI, because I was kind of surprised to like see it in just like a regular cookbook. But I am super excited about it. I will hopefully show it at some point in the near future. So now moving into book of the month. So back in June, around the murder of George Floyd and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, there was a lot of discussion about book of the month and their kind of interactions with reviewers on social media, as well as the lack of diversity in the titles that they choose. And so there was a bit of a kind of movement towards like canceling book of the month, both in the like physical like canceling your subscription, but also in like the cancel culture way of like canceling book of the month. However, in response to that, they did put out this post about how both internally within their company's staff, they are going to try to increase diversity, particularly in like higher up positions, but then they were also planning on diversifying their selections. And so many people were planning on kind of holding out from continuing to pick books from them for several months to see if they actually followed through with diversifying their selections. However, I, at the time that all of this came out about book of the month, was smack dab in the middle of my annual subscription. I've been a member of book of the month for going on like 2.5 years now, and I've really appreciated their service. They've given me quite a few diverse titles that I would not potentially otherwise pick. In fact, you can see some of them in the background, like The Girl with the Well-Living Voice, The Vanishing Half, Severance by Ling Mom. And so I personally, just because of my reading tastes, have been inclined towards the fairly limited diverse selections that they've often picked. However, I totally see, going through my own picks over the years, how frequently like white authors and white stories have been promoted by the platform. So I really kind of struggled with how I wanted to approach my consumption of book of the month, but at the same time also did not feel financially comfortable with canceling my subscription, because at that point I just didn't have the financial stability to make that a like sound financial decision. So I was thinking, how do I really kind of vote with my dollar, if you will, and use my book of the month subscription to further the kind of book buying philosophy and ethics that I see fit. So with all of that kind of internal reflection, I came up with a solution, which is to buy pretty much little asterisk there, books by Black authors from book of the month, in large part too because I remember around this time that this was all happening, Mara from Books Like Woes, which if you're not following Mara, I love her. She's one of my fave booktubers. I'll put her in the description box below. Mara did mention how many units book of the month moves of books, particularly books that may not have reached the audience that they currently reach with book of the month picking up the book. And so the potential for recognition and a wider readership of a book, particularly a book by an author of color, is pretty high with book of the month. And so by supporting them in diversifying their selections, we also are, as consumers, potentially increasing the readership and kind of notoriety of an author of color. So I did see that as a kind of silver lining of continuing to support book of the month, in saying that these diverse titles are ones that we would like to see more regularly. So I decided that with the rest of my subscription and potentially moving forward, I've not decided if I'm going to re-up my subscription. It expires or renews, or whatever the word would be, in the end of November. So I have a couple months to think about that, but I am kind of from now until November going to be getting exclusively books by Black authors, with little asterisks that I'll point out in just a minute. So I just wanted to kind of share the books that I've gotten in the past couple months. In August, one of the picks was The Death of Vivian Og, and I will say, obviously I am a white person, as you can see, and so I don't want to say this with any like certainty, or any other reviewers of color don't agree with this statement. Like, obviously you should listen to them, but I will say I personally have seen a pretty substantial increase in the amount of diversity in their selections, both in the people who are picking the books as well as the books themselves. And so I, for one, have been kind of impressed with their work, and I do hope that they continue to show up in terms of providing diverse options for their readers. But one of the books that I picked in August that was one of the like 5 top books was The Death of Vivian Og by Akwaeke Omezi, who is a non-binary author, or at least they use they them pronouns, who either was born in Nigeria, currently lives in Nigeria, or has Nigerian ancestry. I'm not sure which of those 3 it is. This is their 3rd book, their 2nd book written for adults, and their first literary fiction book that was not fantasy, as their debut novel was Freshwater. which was a fantasy book kind of exploring non-binary genderqueer identities, and I believe this book also explores genderqueer non-binary identities, as it follows Vivek Og, whose family never really knew them, and it kind of follows the ramifications within their family of their death. So super excited about this one, and it's teeny tiny, so I definitely will hope to get to this one soon. And then the other one, which was not one of the 5 picks, but I noticed that they had it as an additional book, as Book of the Month does usually have up to 5 books that are like additional new books for that month. They had Luster by Rafe and Leilani, which is a book that I'm super excited about. Definitely kind of has Jenny written all over it. It is a millennial story about a young woman who gets involved with a married man from her office, and I believe the wife, the husband, and our main character, whose name is Edie, all kind of get involved with one another. And so yeah, I'm very intrigued about this one. I've heard it's like pretty emotionally intense, because this is obviously a very tumultuous situation that Edie has gotten herself into. So I'm super pumped about this one, and I think my book club that I do virtually with 2 of my best friends may be reading this for our like September or October selection. So we'll see. One of my friends and I are definitely going to be lobbying for this to be our pick. So yeah, excited about this one as well, and was super excited to see this one, especially as it is a debut novel by FSG, which is a slightly smaller imprint of, I believe, HarperCollins. Although they might be part of the Hatchet book group. Now I can't remember. So I was super excited to see this book, because I definitely think this was one that potentially could benefit from the audience that Book of the Month has, that may not have heard about this book or been interested in this book otherwise. So that was kind of a silver lining that I saw to the Book of the Month whole situation. But then for September, they had an amazing selection of books. I believe of the 5, only 1 of the books was by a white author, and the other 4 were by authors of color. 2 were black authors, and then I believe there was an indigenous author and an Asian American author. So was super excited about the September selections, but the one I ended up picking, because one of the selections was Transcendent Kingdom, which, as you saw, I pre-ordered. I ended up picking Cast: The Origins of Our Discontent by Isabel Wilkerson, and this one I actually also thought about buying from my independent bookstore, because I was potentially interested in a book talk she was doing with acapella, as I mentioned previously, but I ended up not buying it, and I'm glad that I didn't, because I got it from Book of the Month. But this is a historical nonfiction book, quite a chunky one at that, that basically discusses Wilkerson's theory of a caste system being present in America. As I feel like many people know from like history or geography, there is a quote-unquote caste system. Having taken some like undergraduate level classes on India, the caste system, as we learn about in K-12 American education, is not really what's happening in India. But anyway, I think this book is kind of discussing the more rigid social roles that people in America play. So I'm super intrigued about that, because that's a topic that sounds super fascinating. And Wilkerson is also known for The Warmth of Other Suns. That is a historical nonfiction book about the Great Migration, which is also one I'm very interested about. So super excited about this one, and was excited to see it on Book of the Month's website. And then we get to the little asterisk that I made for myself, which was that there are a couple romance books that I got from Book of the Month within the last year or so that had a sequel coming out sometime this fall. And so I did tell myself, if the sequel was available on Book of the Month, since that's the edition I have of the first one, I would get myself the second one from Book of the Month, because I wanted the matching copies. And that did happen this month. So last year I read Bringing Down the Duke by Evie Dunmore, who is a white author, and so this month they did have her sequel to the first one, which was A Rogue of One's Own. Unfortunately, I have heard some mixed things about this one, particularly related to like colonizer narratives, which is not great, especially because I got it from Book of the Month. So we're gonna see this and read this with a kind of critical eye. But yeah, this one I was anticipating prior to kind of hearing some of those more negative things, and I believe is another enemies to lovers romance set during the late 1800s in the UK, and follows a group of suffragettes who all attend Oxford as some of the first women to attend Oxford. So I did appreciate the first one quite a lot for its kind of historical authenticity in a historical romance, which I believe this one will kind of also follow up on, but potentially also have some shady colonizer narrative. So love that for me. We'll let you know what I think about this one. But then finally, moving on to my actual like book buying strategy moving forward, and then kind of 2 examples therein of what I'm planning to do with that book buying strategy. So as I just said, I do have book of the month at least until November, so I will continue to be getting books from book of the month, but I also wanted some way of supporting indie bookstores without breaking the bank and kind of with a specific plan of like when will I acquire books. So I came up with an idea to buy books every other week, so on the day that I get paid, from my Goodreads shelf of next books to buy. So I'll put a link to my Goodreads shelf down in the description box below. It has about 50 books, which is a lot, but they're all books that I'm really eagerly anticipating, and books that if I didn't have this strategy, I would probably just be buying randomly anyway. So my plan is to kind of randomly choose 3 books using a random number generator from that list, and then from those 3 that I've randomly chosen, pick one of those books that I would like to actually acquire, and then acquire it from a local indie, probably doing kind of on a rotating cycle, either in my area or one that I love that's in a different city that I want to support. So I did end up doing it as payday was last Friday last week, and I ended up picking Revolutions: How Women Changed the World on 2 Wheels by Hannah Ross, which is a nonfiction book about the history of women's cycling. I don't know if I've talked about this on my channel, but I love cycling. I don't do it nearly as much as I should, but I do love it, and I hope to someday be in a place where I can regularly commute to work and potentially do other things by bicycle, but Atlanta is unfortunately just a little too hot and a little too hilly for that to be a reality for much of the year. I have not really heard anyone talk about this, probably because it's incredibly niche and just kind of something that I am interested in, but I am super excited about this one and will be reading it very soon. But then additionally, on top of that, I am going to allow myself 1 book per month that I pick that fits a certain theme. So a book, like for example, this month I picked a book that will work for Latinx Heritage Month. Next month I think I'm going to pick a book that kind of has spooky vibes that I want to read during October. So that kind of book that I intentionally pick will be one that I plan to read that month or within kind of the month that I've acquired it. So the one that I ended up picking this month was Cantoras by Carolina de Robertis, which is a historical fiction, literary fiction novel set in Uruguay in the 1970s that follows 5 women who miraculously find one another during the military regime that was present in Uruguay during this time. And I believe there are a lot of lesbian relationships in this one, so kind of a lot of queer representation. I know the author is queer herself, and she lives in Oakland with her wife and her 2 children, and I'm really excited about this one. I know it got a lot of buzz last year because I think it was part of the BookTube prize, I'm not quite sure, but I remember hearing a lot of people really enjoy this one, and I also really do not have that many, or have not read that many authors from South America, so that was something that I kind of wanted to remedy during Latinx Heritage Month. So super excited about this one, and will definitely be reading this prior to October 15th, which is the last day of Latinx Heritage Month, either as a book right at the end of September or the beginning of October. So those are all the books slash my future book buying strategy that I wanted to talk about. I do also have a few arcs that I've gotten recently through NetGalley, but I decided that I'm not going to talk about those because this video is already too long, but you will definitely be hearing about all of those in upcoming TBR videos. So that is everything from this video. I'm sorry that it was so incredibly long. I know book hauls are usually short, and yet here I am chatting away for like almost 40 minutes. If any of these books sound interesting to you, I'd love to talk to you about them in the comment section below, or if you've read any of these books and highly recommend them or potentially didn't have the best experience with them, please do let me know also in the comment section below. I hope you have a great day whenever you watch this. If you are not already subscribed to my channel, I would love for you to do so, and I will talk to you next time.